Welcome to Enlightened Omnivore. I'm your host, Steve Sabaker. Each month, I dig into the stories behind our food system with experts who know it best. Scientists, farmers, ranchers, and authors, elaborating on what's really shaping what we eat. For those of you who've been enjoying the show all along, please consider leaving a review where you get your podcasts. Follow Enlightened Omnivore on Instagram and Facebook, and check out my weekly newsletter at enlightenedomnivore.substack.com. Let's get ready to expand your palate and your mind, one bite at a time. Super excited about this month's show with Mark Keller, a good friend of mine who has spent almost 30 years in the meat business and has a real passion for doing it the right way. Let's jump right in. I am so looking forward to this conversation with you. It's been a while since we've chatted, but there's been a lot of adventures that we've been on together over the years. And I think you have a really beautiful, unique story in the world of regenerative food. So I can't wait to dive in. Thank you for being on Enlightened Omnivore.
Steve, it is a real pleasure to be here with you. You are one of my homies. You know, we've been through a lot together, dreaming our dreams, creating the food systems that we have. It's a real pleasure to be on. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, because I think you've had, and a little bit of your whole career, because you've had an amazingly broad career in this world of regenerative agriculture, and you've had a lot of roles, and you've seen a lot of things. And I think your perspective is really informative of where we were maybe 20 years ago and where we are now. So tell us what you're up to and how you got there.
Okay. So today I am the director of operations and product for Creamco Meats that's located in Oakland, California. They acquired my company, Keller Crafted Meats, almost 2 years ago. And so that was quite the ride. We built Keller Crafted over 23 years of doing. When I started out in 1999, I was working for Prather Ranch, and I was managing their slaughterhouse, their packing plant, their abattoir, however we want to say it. And I was doing farmers markets on the weekends, like total dual role, one person running the plant. And from there, I started realizing what an extremely unique product that we had, that was not only incredible from the attributes, the list of adjectives that you could associate with the product, but also for the nutrient value and the way that your body felt after you ate it. It was captivating. And I remember my real first spiritual experience, like eating this amazing food. And so I realized we had to just get it to a lot more people. That led me going down to the Bay Area and taking it to farmers markets. They weren't even selling beef at farmers markets when I started. I had to talk my way into that. They said beef is not, because it's a federally inspected product, it's not like a CDFA product. I had to go through all the hoops to get something that's federally inspected, into a farmer's market. So that took like a year just to talk my way into markets. But we ended up scaling into about 13 markets a week. And at that point in 2001, the owner of Prather Ranch said, Mark, you've built this whole thing up. It's getting a little complicated. And I think, we should have you peel off and start this, this marketing distribution company. And so that's where I started. And it was very natural for me to understand, because we were buying whole animal increments from the farm. So I was responsible for taking X amount of whole animals every single week. And my job was to have them flow all the way through the system and to add the most amount of value for the end retail consumer, which at that time was mainly people we knew. They're all people coming to the farmers markets, just all these conversations. And we had a lot of success. We had a lot of like the big names in food. I mean, we had, Michael Pollan was a customer and Alice Waters was a customer. It was like really delightful. We had great chefs in the Bay Area that came through. It was a very creative time. We were talking about organic beef for the first time, and we had all the curmudgeons talking about, well, all beef is carbon based, it's all organic. And so it was just the early days. Half of a beef carcass turns into more or less ground meats. So how do you move that at the same cadence that you're harvesting animals? So I got heavily into starting to make value added products like all the usual suspects like sausages and hot dogs, and then some deli meats. And then in 2008 is when, in earnest, I moved like my operations into a USDA facility to start pursuing value added process with my entire self.
I have to start with your previous life because I'm a little jealous. So, you were a professional model before you even got into agriculture, which I find fascinating. Have you reflected on how that experience shaped your relationship with your body, your health, your food, and then eventually, how you've contributed to the food system in the last 20 years?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Nobody's asked me that yet, Steve. I would say that my experience in the fashion industry really put me in touch with a lot of photographers and designers who had a lot of creativity, a lot of passion, and a lot of grit. And they were able and willing to go through what it took to manifest something that didn't exist. Being around that many creatives, and I found myself really attracted to all my friends, even to this day, from that portion of my life, are still the dreamers, are the photographers and the designers. And they were willing to kind of take their insides and bring them out to manifest them in the world, to try to bring other people into the beauty that they saw. And that really gave me the courage to try to do the same thing for myself. And my dream, something that's been inside me since I was a very little child, was kind of oneness with the land, with the landscape, with wild places. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that I was part of the wild. I wasn't apart from it. And so that was just a really healthy nudge to follow my heart.
Where
I
did you get
decided
to go? What places did you travel to as a model?
I went everywhere. I went everywhere. Yeah. And I filmed commercials in remote places in India for 3 weeks. And I just got all these great appointments. I lived in Europe for years, lived in New York. That was my kind of my toward the end of my career. And that was it was great. I had wonderful customers. I worked with the best of the best directly with the owners. I mean, I was the in-house guy at Ralph Lauren, and so I would work directly with Ralph, almost on a weekly basis. It was really cool. That's what I said, that, it was to be around that caliber of human being that genuinely cares. They're driven by raw passion. And it's like whether they're going to make money doing something or not, it's going to happen. That was kind of I always knew I had that in me too, but it gave me a lot of strength to pursue that.
So, after hanging out with Ralph Lauren, you decide to go back to Cal Poly to study agriculture?
Yeah. So I applied only to one school because I have to do things with my hands. I'm not like uber intellectual, I mean, I just need to do it. And then when I feel it is when I become really powerful. And when I feel it, I can make really good decisions and I can commit fully to something. It's not I don't trust, just all the intellect type stuff. So Cal Poly has a learn by doing philosophy. I read about it. I went out there and I pulled the trigger and I went cold turkey. I left the modeling industry, cut all ties, that I'm not going to be distracted by this, and I'm going all in. And so I went to school, studied animal science, which was kind of a pre-vet track. which was great. I got all the hard sciences um, but then I was introduced to holistic resource management, and that like blew my mind open. I was just like, wow, this is it. And the power of grass farming. Um, yeah, that was kind of my gateway drug into kind of regenerative ag, which didn't have that name, of course, back then.
Of course, yeah. So holistic resource management. What is that?
Okay, so maybe simply put, and I might get butchered for saying this, but it's really a decision-making framework. Um, and the design, it's a top-down kind of, yeah, it's a discipline where you're trying to balance the whole under management. So you have the social, you have the environmental, and then you have the financial. That's the way I remember it, at least. That's what stuck with me. And you're trying to look at all the stakeholders in a system, and you want to balance everything out. And of course, we have the financial piece, which is so commonly forgotten in all of these models. Like there's a lot of kumbaya talk about regenerative ag and progressive ag systems. But if you're not financially relevant, if you're not making money, it's not real. It's not sustainable.
That's such a good point.
And so I always talk about sustainable finance is the third leg of the stool. And I'm sure I borrowed that from somebody else. But if you don't have that, and if you're not sure, then you're really not really doing sustainable business.
What are the other two legs to that stool?
Well, it's the social and environmental.
Absolutely. So, holistic resource management at school, you're already in animal science, and now you're going into the meat industry. Like,
Mhm.
were you always a meat eater? Did you ever have a question about the benefits of animal proteins?
So I grew up in Southern California, San Fernando Valley. I don't say that I had any kind of true understanding about culinary or really good food. We were definitely, kind of a middle class family shopping at Ralph's grocery store.
What made you interested in animal science then? If you didn't
Oh,
have an ag background and you
yep.
didn't know, you know, what an abattoir was, and suddenly you're looking at animal science, of these
Mhm.
kind of systems, regenerative agriculture that we're talking about all the time. But I mean, when you started out, that seems like a real departure from your personal experience up to that point. What was it that encouraged you to choose that direction?
Yeah. So when I started out, I desperately wanted to farm. I desperately wanted to be a grass farmer and I wanted to harvest grasses with animals. And that was like very naive, of me. Because if you don't have the marketing understood, if you can't take that to and through to the customer, you become a commodity player. And that's what I learned literally within the third or fourth week. I remember exactly where I was on campus at Cal Poly without any kind of understanding of how the agricultural systems work. I'm like, oh, commodities. I had no concept of all this, how this works. So if you're a great regenerative grass farmer, you're doing all this thing and you have a bunch of cattle, if you don't have like all the infrastructure and all the know-how to be able to turn those cattle into beef and then to high quality products and then create the mechanism to actually execute sales to a customer, you're irrelevant and you will get, there was no reward, there was no markets for regenerative or even never even, there wasn't even never ever markets back then. It was natural was the only thing that didn't,
Mhm.
you and I both know what that means.
Not a whole lot.
Not a lot, not a lot. Um, so I remembered exactly where I was when I realized that I need to create this missing middle. There's a bridge from land stewardship and growing animals in the right way as a byproduct of making the right decisions on the land and then to the customer. And I realized there was no cavalry, there was no one to help me to bridge from from farm gate to the end consumer. There was nobody to sell to do that. The cream co's didn't exist. The Keller crafted meats didn't exist. So I just said, okay, I'm going to do this for 10 years. I am going to build the distribution infrastructure. I am going to learn it. And I am going to also then build my clientele base, retail and wholesale clientele base. And I did that literally with zero expertise or understanding. It's all learned by doing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I feel like that's a testament to who you are, Mark, and I've been honored to get to know you and what drives you. And you hinted at a little bit of that in your first career and then kind of how you decided to go this other route and without any real history with these subjects or with the industry. You just were like, I'm going to make this happen. And that grit is what I see all the time in the way that you approach life. You talk about food as sacred. And that's another element that I love about you is that you are a pretty spiritual dude. So is that what drives you to make these commitments to say, hey, for 10 years, I'm going to go this route, even though I don't even know, I don't have a map. Like, I'm just going to do it. Like, what motivates you to be that way? And how is food sacred to you?
You are an awesome person, Steve. That is such a great question. And I know what the cost is for me not being true to myself. And that's pretty great in terms of me just to be the man that I was born to be. And there's a lot at stake if I'm not that guy, if I am not living to my potential. I've been to depths of depression. I know the dark side. And for me I'd much rather take my chances, not knowing what the hell I'm doing, but at least really believing in what I'm doing than not move forward out of fear or sense of failure or anything else. I've learned that if it's in my heart and if it's for me to do, and I believe that I can do well by others by doing it, I will engage. I will try.
I've seen that. I feel that. And it's people like you, and I tell this to my listeners almost every podcast. There's so much commitment in this industry. Whether you're a regenerative farmer or you're a conventional farmer, there has to be so much personal drive because there's so little monetary reward for the most part. And there's so many risks that you guys take, and there's so many challenges. And even in the value add side, like making, the first non-GMO project verified charcuterie, like doing things when nobody in the industry was doing that and not knowing if you're going to get any reward for that, but just being committed to, hey, we're going to make the best product. We're going to do the best for this animal, the best for people who are eating it. And I mean, that's when we started out at, Electric City Butcher. It was kind of in the middle of that. There were a bunch of guys like you who had already been cranking for a decade to build the momentum, and then there were a handful of us who jumped on the wagon and just realized, wow, there's a lot of juice here. There's a lot of energy. Um, Now the food industry has kind of shifted. A lot of us retailers have closed. It's harder and harder for folks like you to continue the virtuous fight. You've got to make sure it's financially sustainable. There's been massive consolidation across the industry. There are so many folks who are gone or been absorbed. Keller Crafted, your own brand, was bought by Cream Co. Is this a trend that's going to help us as consumers, or do you think like this is just the way it has to be to make it financially sustainable?
Well, it is the trend for sure. And I think it's really just reflecting the truth is that the consumer today still loves their convenience, still loves to shop in the way that they want to, and these niche programs are kind of art in a way, and they're kind of consumed like art. They're not consumed as an everyday uh, way of ethos of like how you actually live your life.
And what would you call the niche products or this art?
Well, I would say almost like farmers market quality food. It was like Electric City Butcher. I mean, it was kind of what you and I were all about. Is we're terroir specific. We're sourcing the best quality products that we possibly can. We're working with really hard to work with farmers. It's just like, we're going through all this process. We're developing all these logistics to make something happen. And in the meantime, the big guys are just running semi after semi after semi. They're completely uh, efficient. And people love that efficiency. People love to be able to go on to Amazon and order it and get surprised that it shows up later on that day or tomorrow. And so I think that's part of the reconciliation that's going on right now. I am very pleased and always very humbled to see the participation at farmers markets. I think that's really like where we should be. But getting to your point about the consolidation, I look at it with a lot of optimism because I do think that you look at some of the brands out there. I'll just take like Mary's Chicken. They're a West Coast chicken grower, and they are doing a fantastic job. Are they small? Nope. But they air chill. They have organic. They have non-GMO. They're even their baseline product is so elevated, is so high. Um, so you look at that and you go, okay, they're growing slowly and steadily and moving that. And it's easier now than ever to be able to eat great food. I mean, their product is really, really good. I'm very pleased to be able to feed that to my family. I mean, it's an excellent quality product, and they are scaling. They are regional. Um, so I support them. I think that might be the model. I'm super curious, Steve, like where all of this is going, but looking at the players from being behind the scenes, I run, all the manufacturing, all the in-house production for Cream Co. And it's very transparent in terms of like, is it, we have a halal meat block, we have a grass-fed meat block, we have a local regional, all these different values that these different customers have, and they're all spot on. And it's a lot of work. So, kind of in summary, I think that we're we're on the right path. If you go just step into Costco, there's more organic options than ever. And so to me, that's very encouraging. It's not going the other way. We're not getting more confusing products with like 1980s ingredient lists that are like 15 paragraphs long. It's going the opposite. The trend is going the opposite direction. I think it's more important for us as a conscious consumer to be focused on that we're doing better, not that we're at the best, that we have to be constantly be doing better. And the evidence is, what are they stocking on the shelves?
I love that optimism because I feel like in the world today, there's not a whole lot of it. And I agree with you to an extent that, like, yes, I do see the median moving in the right direction. So on average, overall, I absolutely see products on the shelf now in mainstream grocery stores, at Walmart even, that are attempting to address this larger issue that we have with factory farming, with high carbon intensive agriculture in a system that could be absolutely carbon neutral, if not carbon negative. Um, and I don't want to make it about carbon. I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation about that, but I'm simplifying the terms. But For a lot of people, they see these contractions or lack of access to brands or product claims that they're familiar with. And then they also worry about greenwashing, where something says it is grass, fed, and it's everything's grass fed until a certain point, or it says organic, but it's organic coming from Brazil or something like that, not local. So what do you worry about if you are optimistic that we're moving in the right direction? What about the current food system keeps you up at night?
I'm not sure that I am being kept up at night about our current food system.
Well, that's awesome. Tell me your secret, because I worry about these things only because I feel like, especially as we're looking at um, the USDA's ability to maintain programs that it's had in place for years and years. The lack of access to local abattoirs, so that smaller farmers who are raising animals, they don't have a place to actually process them. The reliance still on GMOs and chemicals and fertilizers to produce the majority of our high carbohydrate foods. Like, those things don't sweat you.
Well, no, I mean, I guess going back to what I just said, I'm watching the macro trend. I'm always like interested in the very big picture. The day-to-day firefight kind of stuff, like that's just, there's a lot of noise around food. And do I worry about glyphosate? Yeah. Do I buy my oats for my overnight oats every day, glyphosate free, tested? You bet I do. Like, I don't sweat that because once you know better, you can do better. And there are options. So, that's just me on a personal level, and so maybe a lot of other people don't have access, or don't have the insight. I guess maybe that would be the one thing is just, people where the level of education is, but again, I'm watching the retailers, I'm watching them change. If there is greenwashing, at least it's powerful enough that they understand that, like, there are companies like the big tech companies that have ESG goals. They must meet them. They have to buy in accordance with, with programs that are supporting their ESG goals.
What are ESG goals?
Environmental, social, and governance.
So these are goals that companies are committing to for no real profit motivated incentive. They're just culturally holding themselves to these norms.
That's right. And they're feeding a lot of people.
Talk about food as a connector. I mean, my favorite place is the dinner table, and it be full of friends and curious folks who want to chat over a nice meal. Bringing people together, kind of like from the dawn of life, right? This is like how we've connected. How do you maintain that reverence for connection while you're operating in this very practical, competitive, and ever changing landscape now?
So I keep the reverence, probably a couple different things. One of them is I never get desensitized, especially on the meat side of things, that something has to lose its life. And so I always stay very present in my own spiritual practice, knowing that, like, I'm a flicker, like my life, to be grateful, to have gratitude, and to know that, like, I'm here and then I'm going to be gone. And that also motivates me just to, like, be who I am and to put whatever I need to put out there, put it out there. So in the same vein, I would never project that any life form, whether it's a bug that just hit my windshield or a chicken that we just ate, has any more or less significance than my own. I think that for me, that's not true. It's just these cycles. So that's number one is this cycling of life. Number two is that what you alluded to is there is something about what we eat becomes literally becomes part of us. And when we make really good choices, not only about what we eat, but how that was prepared, I have a deep belief that that does change us, and it does heal us, and it does make us better. And being conscious when we're eating, it's like going to like an incredible meal, and you see the chefs and they're obsessing over the presentation, and there's no denying that that's a special meal because just there's so much energy in that food. It's incredible, and the sourcing and all, everything that goes into it. I'm extremely respectful of that entire process. Or whoever is creating the food in your home, that in my case it's my wife. She makes it with so much love, and that always comes out in the food, right? So
That's the most important ingredient.
yeah, and it's such a cliche, but it's absolute truth in my understanding. So it's also the place where the most important things, when we start to slow down and we pause, we share a meal with somebody. And let me just talk a little bit about that probably the most dangerous thing for us human beings is the sense of being alone. We can't have that. Like, that does not work. We implode. We self-destruct if we feel like we're alone. Well, guess what? Having that communal time with maybe someone's setting the table, someone's making the salad, somebody's helping get plates down and stuff like that. That's that energy that so that's that interconnection feeding into a very healing time, spiritually and physically.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, for me, and I noticed this in the last several months where things got super busy and I make most of the meals in my house. And it's really the one time during the day that all five of us get together. And I would be in such a mindset of making the food, rushing to make this food, or distracted about something else while I'm making it, not slowing down, maybe even burning something or forgetting something, and then sitting it down on the table. And my kids would notice. They'd be like, Dad, dude, what is going on? Chill out. They're like expecting this moment of family connection. And I'm like, hair askew, sweating profusely, trying to figure out what the hell I'm, doing next. And that really grounds me as well. It reminds me, oh, wow, I am definitely bringing this energy to this conversation that is it's unsettling. And I feel like the great thing about making a commitment to eating together is the moments where the conversation is great and the kids share something special, or you're like all really enjoying this meal, it's the best spaghetti sauce that you ever made. But it's also the opposite, is like realizing the deficits when you don't have that perfect moment. It reminds you that that's super essential to your health and your well-being, and you better make some changes so you can get back to that balance.
Very well said, Steve. That was beautiful.
So I'm really curious about what you've seen over the last 30 years, 25 years. When you look at a farm,
Mhm.
when you look at a system that's operating in balance agriculturally, like what are you seeing? Like when you go, you've done a lot of visits to farms. You used to, I mean, that was one of my favorite things to do with you was we would go out and see, the folks who are raising these products that we would be sharing in our store and connecting with the ranchers and the farmers. But I feel like your eyes see something different. When you're out there, what are you looking for and what do you see?
So I have a background in animal production and in livestock management, with a focus on getting the animals up to production. But I will be looking at things and all of a sudden start project out, like where I'm standing right now. Well, it's springtime or it's summer or it's winter. It happens to be winter, but thinking about the seasonality, because we eat in a 52-week kind of mode. We don't eat seasonally. There isn't like the time where we harvest the hogs in the fall. We make all of our charcuterie and then we live off that through the winter time. So there's a lot of things that these dynamic farmers need to do to be able to replicate quality 52 weeks a year. And that's amazing. I look for, yeah, how do they do that? What will they need to do? At what point do they step out of the bounds of what is sustainable? Because at a certain point, Mother Nature's like, hey, I'm going this way now. We're shutting things down. And it's like, well, we need to keep going. So what do we need to do to keep going? So I like to always talk about those, how you deal with heat, how you deal with cold, how you deal with rain events, all of that. I like looking at genetics. I like looking at the feeds and, kind of their nutrition program. I'm especially interested in all the quality steps, like on the finishing side. So I like to really understand that entire process and how does it evolve as you travel through the seasons, because that's a whole nother like very nuanced area. But we know because these products that are brought to market on these smaller farms, they're going to be more expensive. And so they need to taste dynamite. They need to be incredible. And so we need a very comprehensive plan to be able to deliver to the customer something that's like your eyes roll back. Like that's how we know we got them. Like, you have that pork chop. You're like, oh my gosh, it doesn't even come close to like what you can buy, at the local, grocery store. It's not even close. Well, that's like our job is to help exacerbate the goodness, right? And we don't even know. I'm super pumped to like learn about nutrient density. There's like a whole brand new frontier on that area. What we have is a system within this farm management plan that can deliver quality and not break their own rules. Or if we are breaking our own rules, are we all on board with how that's being done? During a rain event, what are we doing? They call it like livestock husbandry. I love that word. It's like we're responsible for taking care and stewardship of these animals, making sure that they're calm and that they have a great life. If we're not doing that, then we should not be tending to livestock. We should let someone else who's got their act together do that.
You talked a little bit about how when Mother Nature wants to go one direction, but ranchers and farmers have to go the other because we've got to eat 52 weeks a year. And we've been programmed that we're always going to have oranges and melons, on the shelf, and we're always going to have fresh meat and bacon all year long. What are some of those biohacks that ranchers and farmers do to kind of
Yeah.
work outside the bounds of where Mother Nature's headed?
Well, I mean, so if you look at like hogs and poultry, but you look at the like the deep straw bedded systems that were basically developed in Europe, but it's all composted bedding, very sanitary, very biological. Like you go into those places, it does not smell like a confinement swine operation. You don't have, lagoons filled with manure. It's a whole different biological system, but yet you can run it year round. And so you can set that thing up and it does well to ventilate and protect the animals during the summertime. And they always have access to the outdoors. They can go lay out in the sun, they get a suntan, or they can come back. And then during the winter, you can bring in more stocks or bedding, and then they can burrow under that, and that's going to be their sleeping bag. And so like that's a great example of a system. When you're talking about ruminants, you're talking about forage flows. So you're looking at following the landscape. Now, the most successful, the types of farmers that I'm looking and ranchers that I'm looking to align on a business level is ones that have resources at multiple different altitudes, because you can find different grazing plans at different altitudes, different, terrains. And naturally. And yes, it involves fossil fuels, getting animals onto trucks and moving them around. Um, or they are in a very moderate climate year round, right? So we have like one of our hotbeds for grass finishing cattle is in the Humboldt area, specifically on like the Eel River Delta around like Ferndale and so forth. It's a very moderate place. It basically just mimics the temperature of the ocean, which is 55, 50, maybe 52 degrees. But for an Angus animal, like that's like heaven, you know. And also the plants, you know, that like that, it's like heaven, you know. Ryegrass and white clover, which is rocket fuel for cattle, for ruminants, it loves that. It's like Ireland. It's like, yes, we're home, you know. But you can't destroy your, you know, your pasture. If there's a big rain event, if you let cattle out there, you're going to just destroy your resource base. So what are you going to do? Like you have to talk about these things. Like what are we going to do during the wet months? And so you have to find an acceptable alternative for how you're going to meet that 52-week demand and deliver a quality carcass with low stress animals, while honoring the landscape.
And making sure they've got enough of a ration, right? I mean, you're talking about moving,
100%.
yeah, moving these animals. The ration is, what they're eating, right? This kind of mix of, mostly if you're talking about ruminants or grass eating animals, beef and sheep, it's talking about eating a lot of different kinds of wild grasses or even seeded grasses in some situations, or hay, or there's all these different approaches that I think a lot of people don't realize. And I think it comes back to your first comment at the beginning of the conversation where you said I wanted to be a grass farmer. It's like you're literally thinking about what you're growing the food, right? And so you're not raising the cow, you're raising the food that's going to feed the cow. The cow knows how to eat it. You don't have to do anything. If you set up the ration properly and you get the cow, to the right grass, it knows what to do. It can put on weight and put on flavor and put on nutrition. I think there's so many other elements of this that folks, just as you were talking, there's so many layers that people don't realize go into agriculture and go into the daily decision making to make world class and nutritious and sustainable food. What's the one thing that you'd love people to know that maybe you've never been able to share, that folks, if they just understood this one thing, it might be like an aha moment of the efforts that you and the farmers and ranchers of our food system do to make sure that we get food on our plates.
Well, I think you probably have a very educated audience, and probably many of them already know this, but the entire act of growing food is extremely complicated. The planning and the resources to create a pound of ground beef on a table is literally like 3 years in the making, from conception to pound of ground beef. There is countless decisions and actions that are taken and multiple hands it has to flow through to get there. And the patience that's needed to make change in a large system like this, you need patience, you need delay of gratification. And I think that maybe goes back to, you asked, there's nothing that keeps you up at night. And I think I've been tempered now a little bit to know that like we're on the right path. I really believe that we're on the right path. We're drifting on this massive cargo container ship, and we're drifting in the right direction. I do believe that. I see that. I see evidence, because 20 years ago, none of this infrastructure was in place. The shelves of the grocery store are totally different than they were before. The consumer knows that, if you're eating donuts and it's got 50 ingredients, it's probably not the right thing. But people didn't, I don't think they knew that back then. Just knowing that all these things take time, and that, Adam Smith's invisible hand, if you vote with your dollars, that's the fastest way to make change. You want to make change? Spend money on the things that count. So if you care about local systems and about food and relationship, and if you care about that energy that we talked about earlier, go to the farmer's market. Simple. And then I would also say stay connected to that energy. You know, grow some grow a basil in your window. Stay connected to life and the growing systems and struggle with that and see how you go on vacation and be like, damn, I just killed the basil. That's what it takes. It's hard. You know, like when you're farming, these people, it's 365. You know, they're on it. There's no holidays for farmers. They got to get up if they're in the dairy industry. Someone's milking cows on Christmas morning. You don't get the day off. So it's just, some, gratitude, patience, and then vote with your dollars. If you want organic A2 milk, go and buy it consistently. That sends a signal to the market. And then if you want the best, and this is an area that I'd love to be able to, pioneer. This is what I'm excited about for the next, kind of phase of my career, is exploring nutrient density and the interconnectedness of really healthy, enriched systems and actually the output, because we taste it from a culinary perspective, like, oh my gosh, that was an incredible meal. But what was it really? I've done just enough work with the Biological Institute looking at growing systems and the nutrient density to be like super curious about that, because that tomato that you grow in your backyard that you take a bite of in July versus the one you buy, at the grocery store, your eyes roll back. You're like, oh my God, what did I just have? That was incredible. I want to guarantee you that one tomato is like 20 tomatoes that you could find in the store. The nutrient density, like you just ate the vitamins and minerals of 20 of whatever that was. So anyway, I think that's, just being focused on voting with your dollars, going for quality, following your taste buds. That's all of our intuition. Don't get dumbed down to that. And then eat simply. I made a huge pivot in my own life. I'm 52 years old right now. And I had like a flip the switch moment last August. I said, enough. It was August 2nd. I said, enough. We all know what we need to do. Like you go on, you can understand your macros. You understand that alcohol isn't good for you. We already know all these things, but are we willing to do what it takes to be the best version of ourselves? And I flipped the switch.
Wow.
And what I can tell you is that what happened to me, it simplified all my eating. I went from like, food is fuel, and I'm looking for the best. And it's still delicious. You can still eat that way and eat delicious, and you can lose the weight. If you're not happy with your physique, just know that like there's another path for you, and you can still vote with your dollars. You can still buy locally. You can still have these incredible meals, and you can do it all.
I love it, Mark. And I think we'll leave it there because I couldn't have said it better. We are so blessed to have people like you in our food system. I hope there are a lot more folks like Mark Keller out there making quality food and making sure that we've got choices in this ever consolidating food system. And who doesn't want a little bit of optimism here? Let's get a little bit of positive juice, a little silver lining. We're not given that information very much every day. But hey, that big container ship, it's moving in the right direction and full of lots more healthy and sustainable choices than we had 20 years ago. So thank you, Mark. Really appreciate you taking the time today. It was tons of fun catching up and just hearing your experience and your wisdom. And keep going out there and fighting the good fight.
Steve, you're a lovely human being, and it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for digging into another story with me this month. Don't forget to review the podcast wherever you listen. Check out Enlightened Omnivore on Instagram and Facebook, and read my weekly newsletter at enlightenedomnivore.substack.com. Until next month, stay curious and keep asking those hard questions. This is Enlightened Omnivore. Everything in moderation.